If you like this podcast or the previous ones, please consider buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Frankied Pod. It just goes to help fund the software and the hosting. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. Tonight I'm talking to Andy Williams. Andy served with the Paras, but most recently he's become an author, and I've actually got his book on Audible. I'm too lazy to read it, so I listened to it while I was in the car, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was that good, I actually left a review, which I've never done before in my life. I'll say when I left a review. I'll put it into ChatGPT, and they give me a review, because my English is crap. You know, I couldn't write a book. No. Right. How are you doing, Andy? You all right?
Yeah, very good, Frankie. Thanks for having me on. It's a privilege to talk to you, and thanks for the review as well.
Yeah, no, I had to leave some of it because, as we'll mention later, and I will recommend this book to anybody. The way you talked about PTSD in that book kind of opened my eyes, because it was so raw and real, and I'd never heard it explained like that before by someone. You know, and I know lots of people who've suffered from it. I wouldn't say I have, because I've never been diagnosed with it, but we've all had moments. And the way you described that actually touched a few fucking raw nerves. You know what I mean? But it was eloquent, and it was precise, and it was damn good. Anyway,
no,
right.
I appreciate that.
Before I blow any more smoke up your ass, we'll carry on with the podcast. So it's the same 5 questions that I ask everybody. So it's: where did you grow up? Why did you join the military? What was it like? Why did you leave? And what have you done since? So if you just want to give us a start off by where did you grow up and why did you join the military?
Yeah, so I grew up in North Wales mostly, a little seaside town called Prestatyn on the North Wales coast, and it's a beautiful part of the country, but there's not a great deal going on there really. I spent a few years, you'll obviously know from the book, I've had a few years of my childhood in Saudi Arabia. So I've never actually lived with my dad. He's always worked abroad.
Yeah.
And he spent 25 years in Saudi. Before that, he was in Malaysia, and he's an engineer by trade. And coming from a small mining village in North Wales, all my grandparents were all down the pit. They were all miners, and I suppose that was his opportunity to get out of the village. Yeah. And that was really our relationship. I've never known anything other than for him to live abroad, and you know, I'm absolutely fine with that. So I'm the youngest of 3 siblings. There's quite a big gap between us, and my brother's 14 years older than me. 14 years. My sister's 12 years. So there is quite a big gap there. So I don't really have any memories of us living together when I was very young. But he left to join the Marines when he was 17, and I'm similar to me really. He wanted to get out of North Wales just to see the world and opportunities and join the military, like a lot of us do that join the military. Yeah. And so there was just me and my sister. She's 12 years older than me, and I don't really have many memories when I was very young of my mother. But she did come back onto the scene throughout my upbringing. But she was basically a violent alcoholic. Absolutely alcohol dependent, and the stories that my brother and sister have told me about her growing up, they're not very nice, and I had the opportunity to see that firsthand growing up. So when I was about 3 years old, the alcohol dependency got the better of my mother, and she decided that she wanted to start a life away from us. So the only way of putting it, she basically just walked out of the door one day and didn't come back, and left my sister, who was 14, 15 at the time, and I was about 3, and just left us. And so my sister and I went to live in Saudi Arabia for a few years. And I know there were conversations of my dad coming back, or of us going to an international school in Saudi. But anyone that knows my sister will tell you that she is fiercely independent and very strong-willed, and an amazing woman who saved my life on more than one occasion, which we'll come on to. So we decided, and it was the mid to late 80s at this point, we decided that we would pack up and we would go and live in Saudi. And I have a few memories. So I would have been 4 or 5 at that time. Went over at 3, stayed a couple of years. So I do have memories of living there. And when you're that age, it's just one big adventure.
Yeah, it's just, you don't like live it, do you? You know what I mean? It's just being lived for you. It's around you, and it is like, as a kid, you're just in awe of everything, and it is like an adventure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't really remember missing my mother. And I just remember Saudi being really hot, obviously. And there was a pool on the compound, so I was in the element. And it was such a different world from North Wales. So I loved it. And we've got some old family videos of me just running around the swimming pool all day. We lived on a western compound in the middle of the desert, and then my dad, who worked an ethylene plant in the middle of the desert, he'd go to work every day, and we were just on an extended holiday, I suppose. Yeah. My sister left school at 15, and then I suppose she got to that age where she was growing up herself, and especially for a Western woman in Saudi in the late 80s, it's a very restrictive country. You're expected to wear an abaya as a minimum, or a headscarf whenever you go out in public. She didn't have any friends there, so I completely understand her reasoning for wanting to come back to North Wales, back to the UK, to be with her friends. And I ended up going with her. So it's when I think back, when I reflect back on that time now, was it the right thing to do? I don't know. I don't have any regrets. Me and my sister have an unbelievable bond. But she was 15 when we left, and we both moved into it was an old council flat in North Wales, and the flat had my dad had bought the flat off his mother. And so we moved there, and my dad would send my sister some money every month, and she became my full-time surrogate mother at the age of 15. I mean, I've got an 18-year-old now, and I still look at him as my little boy. It's crazy, but this was a different time. This was the late 80s, and we got away with it.
It is. It's crazy. I mean, when I heard about it, I was like, "Fuck me!" I was like, my kids are all grown up, but we brought 2 of our grandkids up as well, me and the ex, and I mean, my grandkids, the eldest is 18, and I couldn't imagine any of them. I mean, my daughter had her first kid at 17, but she lived at home then, but I couldn't imagine, like, go on, off you go, live on your own. Bring that, bring your brother up at the age of 15. I mean, did she go back to school or anything? Or?
No, and we didn't have any other family because my mum's actually a Cockney originally, and she ended up in North Wales because she worked for Marks and Spencers. But we didn't have any other family. We didn't have we had extended cousins and aunties, but we didn't really have a close relationship with them. So it was literally just me and my sister, and then my dad was living in Saudi. And I think that knowing how stubborn and independent my sister is, she would have been a huge driving factor of that.
Yeah.
And rightly or wrongly, we ended up just my sister and I living together in the flat. And when I was very young, I didn't really know any different. I don't ever remember missing my mother, but I did always have an overwhelming feeling of I couldn't understand why everybody at school had a mum and a dad, and I didn't have either. I just couldn't understand it in my mind why I felt like I wasn't wanted, felt like I was in the way, and it does play in your mind as a young kid, because as we know, your first 5 years of your life are huge in shaping the person that you become, your emotional resilience, your ability to form relationships with people and interact. And I have later learned that I do feel that's probably part of the reason why I ended up getting a complex post-traumatic stress diagnosis. I do think some of that come from childhood, but it wasn't a sad childhood by any means. And you'll know yourself, the army is a melting pot of people from broken homes and rough neighborhoods, and so it's no different to any other story really. But I remember being very young and we didn't have much, and so I grew up in Prestatyn in North Wales, and like I said, because there wasn't very much going on there, I always knew that I wanted to escape North Wales and see the world. But I didn't really have any role models as a young kid. I looked up to my brother, but he was away in the Marines, so I didn't really see him. Yeah. So it was just me and my sister. So I ended up boxing at a young age. There was a coach in a boxing gym that took me under his wing, and I suppose I looked up to him as a bit of a role model to an extent. And I was still going back to Saudi. My education probably wasn't taken as seriously as it should have, and I would miss the last few weeks of school, and I would spend 2 months every year in Saudi with my dad. And I would just fly over there on my own. He still had to work. He had quite a high pressure job as a project manager of this ethylene plant. But I just sort of knocked about in the compound in the day, and then we'd spend the evenings together. And it was a fascinating place. And I do think that I've always got this urge to travel and see the world, and I've always had a fascination with the Middle East. And I think a lot of that probably stems from my early childhood, just because it was so different from North Wales. I mean, there were still public executions in the cities at that point. Not that we witnessed any, but you'd see the crowds of people.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine your dad saying, "Come on, we're just nipping out. I'll show you something."
Yeah. I remember saying to my dad, asking about it, and he sort of played it down, and obviously wouldn't let me anywhere near anything like that. But it was just very unusual to see. It was it was like medieval times. Yeah. But it was an amazing place. My dad worked with another engineer, and I remember I talk about it in the book, and he lived on the compound, and he was an ex-soldier, but he was in the territorial army. And I remember saying to him that I didn't like the name Andy at one point. I must have been about 8 or 9. And he handed me a copy of Bravo 20 by Andy McNabb. That was probably the first military book I ever started to read. And I remember on one occasion, it was a vast desert where we lived. And my father and I, in the evenings, he was always into golf, and he would take me into the desert, and we'd hit golf balls. and we would demarcate the distance with tyres into the desert. And my dad's friend one day took me out into the desert, and he had a pistol. He had a live pistol, and he gave me the opportunity to fire the pistol at about 9 years old into the desert, and it was an amazing experience. And so and I didn't really engage at school. I bunked off school a lot, and my sister, once my sister married for the first time, she was in quite a violent marriage from an early age. She married very young, and it was only a few years, but it wasn't a good time. I was always in the way, and I just have a feeling of an overwhelming fear when they would argue. And it took its toll on me, to be honest, Frankie. Like I developed tics at a young age, and so unusual. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, and I think it was just a coping mechanism, really.
Yeah.
I like to say, don't get me wrong, my sister's double hard, and she wouldn't be a pushover to anybody, but it was explosive, and they had a daughter together, and we ended up moving out when my niece was 2 years old. I think it was on her second birthday that we moved out, and we had nowhere else to go, so we ended up moving back into the flat. And it was only a small flat, so my niece and I would share a single bed, and then my sister slept on the floor in the lounge. And that was us, really, until the age of probably about 14, I think, when my sister met somebody else, and she would spend more and more time with this person, and he was a great guy, and they were starting their lives together, and she was more mature at this point, but it gave me the opportunity at a young age to live on my own. From about 14, 15, she'd slowly spend more and more time with this person, and she'd come to the flat and put food in the cupboards, and I see her in passing. But I spent a lot of time off school training to join the army, and I just didn't go to school. But I was very thankful of that, because it gave me an independence at a young age that not many people have. And it taught me how to look after myself, really, in a sense of I could cook a meal, I could iron my clothes, polish my boots, tidy a house from a young age. And looking back, it set me up for joining the military at a young age, because I was so independent. And I remember helping some of the lads who in their early 20s, which I know is still very young, but I joined at 16, and I was showing them how to iron their kit and fold their clothes away and all that good stuff.
I mean, I know you grew through that, right? Sorry to interrupt there. Yeah. I mean, I know you grew through that, and for you it was normal, even though it wasn't. It really wasn't normal. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but if you did the other end of it now, and it happened to like the modern society now, or even then, it would almost be classed as abuse, wouldn't it? I mean, You'd be, if the social services had found out about it at the time, you'd have ended up in care. So I mean, your sister did well to keep hold of you. You know what I mean? I mean, I can't understand how that would have. I can't feel or understand how that would have felt. But if you didn't know any different, it was just a normal life for you, really. But to me, it's like it's alien. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like I said, my overwhelming feeling when I think back is just that feeling of I couldn't understand why I didn't have a family like everybody else. But it's no different to any other, foster child or. But my sister did a good job. Probably. definitely struggled because she was still figuring this all out herself. And we weren't, there was no affection whatsoever. She was always my sister. Do you know what I mean? I didn't cuddle her or didn't tell her I loved her or anything like that. She was always my sister. But
she was your mother.
But she played that mother role, and she did the best that she could. And I'm forever grateful that she sacrificed, well, from 15, so she sacrificed her whole life really to put a roof over my head and look after me, and I'll always be thankful for that. So I think the army was my only way out of. I didn't have any formal qualifications when I left school. I didn't really engage other than boxing. I used to box a lot, and I played rugby, coming from North Wales. And initially, I was going to join the Marines, and then following the same footsteps as my brother. But then I got to an age, as you do, where I was old enough to join the Army Cadets, and I was learning about the military, and I would obsess over military books and magazines, and I was always a reader. And I got to an age where I just thought, I don't want to follow in the same footsteps as my brother. I didn't want everyone to think, oh, well, he's just copied his brother. So I remember deciding, I want to be in the paras. It was something different. The maroon beret, the parachute, and it all appealed to me. And I was absolutely set on that's what I was going to do. And there was no other. There's no option of failing for me. I was just so obsessed. I mean, I would carve. These are on my. I only attended a couple GCSE exams, but I would carve the cap badge onto the back of the formal exam paper. I mean, it was ridiculous. I would journal, and I would obsess over these magazines. And you might remember them yourself, but in the early 90s, there was a magazine called Combat and Survival, and they would release one every few weeks. And my brother actually gave me them all, and in each one there would be a different facet of soldiering. There would be stories of soldiers in the Malayan jungle, in the Falklands, and you'd read this and you'd think, I want a bit of that. I want to get out of North Wales and sort of see the world. And so, at 16 and 9 months to the day, I joined the parachute regiment. And then they did the Army Careers Office. They tried to steer me in the direction of the Army Foundation College in Harrogate. And they said, with being young, so they said, well, look, you can go in at 15, but you'll do a year, and then you'll join phase 2 of your training. And I completely get it, but for me, I just I would rather wait a few months and then just go straight up to Catterick and do all of my training there. And so it was in the summer of 2002, August 2002, I joined the parachute regiment. Well, I went to Para Depot, and I was in
a little kid.
Yeah, and it was, I suppose, everything that had happened up to that point. It probably prepared. It put me in a good sort of state for joining, because, like I said, I was independent, didn't have any connections at home, didn't have anyone to really miss or anything like that, and I just threw myself into it. And it's only when I think back now, I think, Jesus Christ, like 16 is young. And even lads, see lads now, 18, 19, I mean, like I say, my lad's 18, could never, he's an unbelievable lad, and he excels in what he does, but he just is too young to be a soldier. But, this is just history, isn't it, on repeat? This has happened forever.
Yeah. I did junior leaders, and I joined again like at 16. But I did, the year of junior leaders, and I mean, just as a side thing, I was watching a podcast the other night where somebody was advocating that we bring junior leaders back for each of the regiments, not get rid of Harrogate, get rid of put recruiting officers back on the streets, not the streets, put the recruiting officers back in the high street, and man them again with soldiers, and bring back junior leaders, and get the lads who are stuck in the dead end towns and stuff like that, put them back in there, get them in junior leaders, get them through that, and then into the army that way. And I kind of get it, I really, really do, and I think that it's not going to happen because budget constraints and stuff like that. But I really get that, and I think it would be a good idea to go back down that route again instead of having a foundation college that each regiment again has its own junior leaders, because it does breed, like the future leaders of the British Army and stuff like that. Sorry, I get that bit in there. You know what I mean with that.
Yeah. Did you feel young at 16 joining?
I'm 56 and I still feel like I'm 12 years old. Yeah. Right, I had two brothers. I was kind of like you. I followed my brothers in the military. We didn't have a military family at all. My granddad was in the Second World War, and that was it. Nobody else. One of my brothers was in the signals. One was in the engineers, and like you, there was a big gap between me and them. I'm 6 years is the gap between me and my brother, and he'd been in the army for years by the time I decided to join. And I'd joined before I left school. I had my oath of allegiance, anything like that. I sat my last exam and thought, what the fuck am I doing here? Because in 3 days' time, I'm going to be in Bramcote in Nuneaton. It's just like, what's the point? Did I feel young? Yeah, I felt like a little kid. I really did. I didn't, like yourself, you'd have probably seen it. You get all these young lads recruits and stuff like that in the training. And not so young either. I mean, I've seen it with older guys. Who don't know how to shave, they don't know how to wash, they don't know how to wipe their ass because mummy did it. And I was one of them kids almost. I mean, I knew how to wipe my ass, I think. I still don't. I didn't shave. I didn't need to shave. They said, right, you've got to shave. Why? Even now, 56, I've got a bit of stubble. That's took me like 3 months to grow. That side of shit. But no, I was very, very immature, and I felt it, and I felt out of place. Even though I was surrounded by everybody else who was the same age. And I think a lot of us did as well. And it was the army that brought us, we changed. Within them first 6 weeks, we changed. We were different people at the end of our life. You're marching off the square type of thing. But yeah, I did. I feel, when I think back now, I felt a bit out of my depth, let's say, and I did feel young. But that's the way it was, and then it was the same for everybody else as well. But going into man service like you did, that must, no. Because I'd have gone in at like 16 and there's guys over there who were 24. That's an old man to me. It must have been like that for you as well.
Yeah. The oldest in the platoon was 28, and that was the cut off. I ended up fighting this guy in the milling during the peak up. So they put the youngest against the oldest. You say old, 28 is obviously not old, but when you're 16, that's a grown man.
Isn't it? Yeah. And he's a grown man. He's fully formed. You're not.
Yeah, and I just, it's probably to do when I think about it, it's probably to do with the stuff with my mum, and I always stubbornly wanted to be the best at anything I did. If we went out on a run, I wanted to be the fastest, and everything I did it 100% that I could. Yeah. Just relentless kind of stubbornness and determination, and just obsessed with joining. There was no, I already suffered with really low self-worth with not having a family, and so I felt like I had something to prove that I deserve to be somebody. That was definitely a motivating factor thinking back, and I just threw myself into the training. I didn't go home on the weekends. I would either stay on the camp or I'd go to one of the other guys' hometowns across the UK. And as you know, Will, the training is 28 weeks, and it's progressive. I probably lost a little bit of fitness when I joined because I trained so hard to get in. Yeah. So a couple of friends and myself would bunk off school, and we would train in the sea in North Wales, and I would come up with these crazy fitness regimes where we would put rocks in a Bergen and we'd run up the mountain, or we would swim in the cold sea and then lift a telegraph pole above our heads or drag it along the beach. And yeah, it obviously stood me in good stead. And so the training is progressive, and luckily I was never injured. I mean, I was still growing, but I never suffered with any injuries. No real significant blisters, because as you'll know, there was a lot of good lads that probably should have passed out and they didn't, and it was just through injury, and they'll get back squadded and whatever. So I just took it all of a stride, really. The fitness, the learning, there's such a high retention of information that you've got to learn, starting from absolute scratch to becoming a soldier at the end. And with it being in 2002, the planes had gone into the Twin Towers the year before, but I definitely at 16 didn't realise the significance of what was to come. I remember coming home from school and seeing it on the telly and thinking, Jesus Christ, but from North Wales to New York at 16, I didn't have a my mind wasn't mature enough to fully grasp the consequences of what was going to happen. So it was probably a really good time to join the military. A really good time, because there were people, when I eventually got to battalion, there were sergeant majors there that had, through no fault of their own, had just done back-to-back tours of Northern Ireland for 20 years. If I know we had the Bosnia, Kosovo conflict, and I know the Paris did a bit in Sierra Leone, and there was a few other bits and bats, but some of the senior ranks there, they've just done back-to-back tours in Northern Ireland, which is a completely different and equally challenging side of warfare, but it's different to operating in the desert. And so it was a perfect time to join. And at the end of the 28 weeks, you do P company at the end of that for a week. And again, I was fit. One of the PTIs took a shine to me, really, and unfortunately he was later killed in Afghanistan. But there's a guy called Dan Shirley, absolute unbelievable bloke, just fit as anything, disciplined, really good bloke, a really good instructor, actually, because as we know, a lot of the instructors will just it's just about thrashing you. Yeah. He'd actually encourage you and bring you on, develop you. And so I passed P company, and then you then go on to do your final exercise in Otterburn, up right up on the border there up north. you'll know it well. Yeah. And it was January at the time. It was absolutely horrendous. Just snowing sideways, and it's a 5-day exercise, 5 or 6 day exercise of digging trenches and just digging into icy water. Just absolutely horrendous. I actually found Dynamite Mole harder than P company, because you don't sleep for the first 3 days. You just dig day night, and if you don't look after yourself, your body will shut down. It's a real test of character. And so I passed out, and at the end of training, my dad had retired at this point, and he come to my pass out parade in Catterick. My sister came, my best mate from school, and it was a really heartwarming moment of feeling like I've made something of myself here. I think we started with 52, less than 20, probably about 16 originals passed out. And it's the course is tough. It's designed to be tough for a reason, especially with the way of the world at that point. The battalions were just gearing up to invade Iraq for the Second Gulf War, and so I joined three para, and I was still only 17 at the time, so. Unfortunately, I missed out on that first Iraq deployment because they just wouldn't let me deploy at 17. I was held back on rearguard, and we saw the battalion go out. And with the lads with me, as they were turning 18, they were sent out the next day or the next couple of days to the desert. And unfortunately for me, because you're at that age, you've just done all that training, you're chomping at the bit to get out there with the lads. It just didn't happen for me, unfortunately, just because I was too young. But I got a chance to go out on a later deployment, so I got to sort of scratch that itch. And then I spent a long time there once I'd left the military as well. So enjoyed.
Did you find, just to interrupt again? Did you find that while you were going through training that? Did you kind of form a relationship with the army where it started becoming your family?
Yeah, absolutely. The corporals, the screws there, whatever you want to call them. You look up to them. They've such a presence at a young. You're so impressionable at a young age. But they have such a presence. It's everything that you're aspiring to be, and that's them there coaching you. And I think, especially for anybody without a father figure or a role model in their life, you idolise them to a point. You look at how they conduct themselves, how they carry themselves, how they look after their kit. It definitely made an impression on me at a young age. And when I think back now, they were probably only in the mid-20s, although they felt, they seemed like grown men compared to now. So yeah, I definitely looked up to them, and we had such a wide variety of recruits in our platoon because as you know, the Paras is a melting pot from all across the UK and the Commonwealth. So we had four lads from New Zealand, we had an Aussie, we had a Norwegian, with Fiji, South Africans, and then every corner of the UK. So that's good because I didn't know anybody outside of North Wales. You just no one leaves the village as nice as it is there.
It's all them other accents and that. I experienced the same thing when I got a junior leaders. I'm like, I can't understand what he's saying. What's he on about? He's from Devon. Yeah, don't know what he's saying. And they were the same with us, like from the northeast. Like it was a bit weird. Yeah, it was a bit crazy.
Well, one of my best mates he was from South Shields, and I couldn't understand a word he said when I first met him. We had a lad from Glasgow, say I'd never met a jock before. So yeah, it was good, and like you said earlier, Frankie, you grow up a lot, don't you? In a short space of time, you grow up very quickly, and you think you know it all, even though you don't. So my first, I spent a year boxing in the army. It wasn't something that I thought I was going to do, but it just so happened that when I got to the battalion and the battalion come back from Iraq, we had the inter-company boxing competition in the battalion, and being a young fit lad, I just got voluntold that that I was going to do it.
Yeah.
And did all right, and then went on to box for the battalion, which was great. But I wanted to do a bit of soldiering. You've just gone through all that training. You're your parachute jumps course. You want to do a bit of soldiering with the platoon. So my first operational deployment was to Northern Ireland towards the end of Op Banner. As we know, it was coming to a close at that point. And so there wasn't the risk that there was a decade or two earlier, but there was still a very real risk on the ground, and it was obviously a new experience to operate somewhere where it was dangerous. There was no-go areas. There was a curfew, and we got involved in some decent scraps over there with the demonstrators. And it was a different side of combat that I didn't experience anywhere else after that point, because you're operating in an environment that is no different to the streets where you grew up. Yeah. The people look the same. They speak English. The buildings are the same. They're very relatable, and yet there is this deep seated complex play of operations that have been going on for decades, and the risk. But it was also different in a sense of the riots, because it's up close and personal, in your face, just complete unadulterated violence. You very easily get snatched and seriously hurt. So it was relatively uneventful, other than a couple of decent demonstrations that we're involved with. On one occasion, we actually got rescued by the PSNI, because there was a very real risk of us getting overrun. Just the area of operations we had was probably too big for company strength, and we were encircled, and the demonstrators were closing in, and they'd got hold of a vehicle. They were rocking the vehicles, and they'd got hold of the radio equipment, and they were snatching bits of kit off the guys, and the PSNI come in with their water cannons, and they kind of got us out the shit there. So,
yeah, but steroids, didn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. One of the guys got he got a mention of dispatches because he was isolated in a snatched vehicle, and all the kit out of the vehicle had been ripped out, and he was the only one left, and it was looking like he'd get snatched by the crowd. And he cocked his weapon and pointed it in the back and told them to get out. He probably would have been justified in using lethal force there, because they'd showed a significant intent of getting somebody, and people were getting really, really hurt. But he got the mention of dispatches for the reason that he didn't pull the trigger, because had he done that, it would have put the peace process back decades. And he was, other than a bit sort of battered and bruised, he was okay. So, but it was good. I
don't think I'd have had that restraint, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. Well, it's a time critical decision you've got to make, and then live with the consequences, isn't it? So, but yeah, no, that deployment, it gave me a chance to embed myself with the platoon, get to know the blokes. There is like there is in most units, there's a very real hierarchy in the paras where more
so in the paras, as I've found.
The senior private soldiers, they run the platoon, and everything is, you have to ask permission to do everything. You expect to do everything as a junior soldier and to prove yourself. And it's good, and it's there's no ill intent. It's just that's what we've always done, and it's something that works. And it was a good experience, and you save a bit of money, as you know, on deployment.
Yeah.
So we came back from that, and not very long after that, we ended up back in Iraq on Operation Telic. So at this point, this was 2005. So
Yeah,
we were down
naughty then, wasn't it?
Yeah, so especially after the fall of Saddam Hussein in the north, it was really kicking off the likes of Fallujah and Ramallah and Baghdad. But down in Basra, there were sporadic acts of violence. There was a couple of suicide bombers that had gone off. I know one of the British units had got into trouble in where was it now? Alamara.
Yeah, Alamara. Yeah.
And there was pockets of insurgency and violence, but the threat really was from mines and IEDs. And at that point, really, the IED threat was quite a new thing to me, although it always existed in Northern Ireland. Other than pipe bombs and petrol bombs, it wasn't something I personally experienced, but it was made very clear to us before that deployment that there was a very real risk of IEDs. And especially up north, they were averaging one every other day, I think, sometimes multiple times a day. But it was good to get into the desert, completely different environment to operate in. And at that time, I had joined a machine guns platoon as part of support company. So we just operated on Wimics with a 50 cal and a Gympie. And we would just spend days in the desert, patrolling the border, carrying out atmospheric type patrols, and we didn't engage the enemy. There was a couple of occasions where bursts of fire we received bursts of fire from over the border, but they weren't aimed shots, and we were strictly told that we wouldn't engage them unless it was necessary. But it was a really good experience just from the sense of living out of the Wimic, patrolling the desert and just sleeping out in the desert at night, and really good, really good soldiering at a young age as well. So I'd only just turned 19 at that point. 19 and a half. So yeah, it was good. Luckily, we didn't lose anybody that tour. There was a few near misses, but we went through that tour relatively unscathed. And at that point, I'd met at a young age. I'd met a local girl from the garrison town, and it probably wasn't the right decision. But we decided that when I got back from Iraq, we were gonna get onto the pad to stay and get married. And it's far too young looking back, but when you're that age, you think you know everything, don't you?
Yeah.
And
so block anyway.
And that, and do you know what, Frank? I missed the block. I missed being in the block with the blokes, and I quite often would spend weekends there because you're not you miss out when everything goes on. yeah, that's it. And so that was 2005, and then we started hearing about a possible deployment to Afghanistan, and I think the battalion felt a little bit disappointed with the original Iraq deployment, the invasion in 2003, because not a great deal happened for the battalion. There was a lot of hurry up and wait, and the battalion, the regiment being how it is, they were very eager to get stuck into some fighting, and it didn't happen for them. So the Afghans started coming on the radar, and we thought it wouldn't really amount to anything. We thought that it would be another Iraq type deployment. We were aware that Helmand, where we were going to go into, was lawless essentially, but the British Army had never seen anything on that scale for a long time, so we didn't really, just paid lip service to it really. And we started the beat up training. We spent a couple of months in Oman training, where it replicated the same terrain and environment of the Afghan mountains. That was a brilliant experience, brilliant experience over there. And so the advance party went out in, I think it was the March of 2006, and just before the main battalion went, I broke my hand. I was a young lad, got into a bit of trouble downtown. Alcohol, alcohol played a big part, and I broke my hand. So I didn't deploy with the main body, which I was absolutely gutted about. I had two fractures in my hand. My hand was in a cast, and so they went out in the April, and then all throughout May and the beginning of June, I started seeing articles in the paper about the fighting that was going on there. And one of the papers compared it to, they said it's like the UK's Vietnam, and a few people said it was the most intense fighting since the end of the Korean War that the British Army had seen on that scale. And obviously I was absolutely desperate to get out there. So I missed the first month, and I got out in the June, and the cast came off my arm. I had to persuade the medical officer to sign me off, but I was desperate to get out of there. But one thing that happened just before I deployed that really sort of hit home, we suffered our first fatality in the battalion, and it was a young private soldier called Private Damien Jackson, and he was shot in an ambush. And he was 18 or 19, might have been 19. He only looked like a young lad. And I was still in Colchester at this time, and I was gearing up to deploy. And I was given the task of going to his bed space, packing his kit for his mother to collect. And, that I remember that really hit home to me, just looking at his personal things and putting them in a big UFO box for his mother to collect, and just sorting out all his T-shirts. And so I knew what I was going into, but as we are at that age, just no sense of fear, and desperate to do what I joined the army to do. Flew out in the June, and the battalion was stretched across Helmand province. Really thin on the ground. So when I flew into Camp Bastion, there was not many people there. It was very much like a skeleton crew, if you like. A few people there maintaining the vehicles, and but all the blokes are out on the ground fighting the Taliban. And so I did my mandatory 3 or 4 days. I forget what they call it now, where it's a bit of acclimatization. You zero your weapons. You go through your rules of engagement, all that good stuff. And then I was told that I was going to fly into Sangin District Centre as part of a machine guns platoon, a machine guns attachment to a platoon. So the night before we deployed, I remember sitting with some of the lads that were rotating back into Camp Bastion from the various district outposts, and they were waiting to go on their R&R leave, and they were saying to me how intense the fighting had been, and specifically Sangin was a hotbed. It was a Taliban stronghold because of its strategic location on the Helmand River, and the poppy cultivation that went on in that area as well. It was a hotbed of fighting. So we flew out there, 6 of us as part of Machine Guns Det, and we supported A Company. And it was an old government building that we took over. And when we went there, it was nothing more than a skeletal shell of a derelict building, like a mud building, and the lads had put some sandbags in the windows, and there was some Hesco Bastion going up. But it was there wasn't much there, and our area of responsibility was going to be the rooftop, which would become infamous with Sangin District Centre. And so we had the guns on the rooftop, and we lived in the compound, and our role was to protect the compound from being overrun. But then we would also provide a gun team every time the platoon went into Sangin. We'd provide a gun team to support them. And I remember the first time I went there, and you go into the district centre and you go up the internal staircase, and there was a cardboard. It was from an old ration box, and someone had written it off, and they put "Welcome to Sangin," and then underneath they'd put two-way range, and then there was an arrow pointing up to the rooftop. And I'd already heard stories of the fighting that had gone on before, and the first thing you see when you get to the rooftop, there was a huge 107 wombat hole in the wall, and a week or so earlier, the Taliban had fired this 107mm rocket into the building, and it killed 3 blokes. It killed 2 signallers and an interpreter. And it was a very real sort of representation of what was going to happen. And so I spent 50 days there, and out of the 50 days, we only had a couple of days there where they didn't try and overrun that compound, or we weren't engaged in some way. And it varied from just sporadic bursts of fire at a Sangha position to full-scale multi-directional attacks with a deliberate attempt to get into that compound. And they say be careful what you wish for. I got everything I'd hoped to do as a soldier, and at the time it was brilliant. It was exciting, but it took its toll later on. And so there was just, and I'll give you a couple of examples, but there were so many occasions on that rooftop and when we were there where I should have been killed. There's nothing other than blind, just fate. I don't know how, but it just didn't happen for me. And I just convinced myself that I was going to die there in some way. And then once I'd convinced myself of that, it was kind of a calm that came over me, because it was inevitable. It was just a matter of time. And so I just came to accept it. I mean, the British forces lost well over 100 soldiers just in Sangin alone during Op Herrick. And I mean, we lost from 3 para 33 alone. And so, there was just so many occasions where I should have been killed, but I wasn't for whatever reason. One of which, this was a little bit later on, but it was just so random. And after we'd been there for a few weeks, the Taliban had been able to source some 82mm mortar barrels. And so it was perfect for them, because up to that point, it was conventional warfare. It was automatic fire, machine guns, AK-47s, and RPGs mostly. And that was okay. I could deal with that because it's loud, it's kinetic, it's chaos, but you know what you're doing. You're looking at a firing point, and you close up. You
tell where it's coming from.
Yeah, you just there's a real threat there, and you can deal with it. But the mortars would hard, because it's just pure luck. There's no soldiering involved whatsoever. It's not like in a firefight where you've not maintained your weapon, or you don't take decent cover or whatever. It's just pure luck. And the second side of that was just the silence before it, the complete, deathly silence, followed by absolute carnage and screaming, and they'd already been quite accurate with the mortars. A Royal Irish soldier who was part of the he was a Fijian lad in the Royal Irish, and they were supporting us as well. So he'd been killed. Not long before that, another young lad had been killed by a sniper. The casualty toll was mounting up. The very first day I landed, a good friend of mine was shot for his leg, shattered his femur. On the same contact, another mate of mine was shot through his shoulder. So there's a very real threat. When they got the mortars, it was completely different. And what would happen is we would get intelligence via the radio, and we would listen into the frequency of the Taliban, and would listen into their conversations. And they knew how we would respond. So they would say, "We're going to fire the long barrels." And they knew that meant we would stand to. They knew how we operated because they were watching us all the time. And so we'd normally get some sort of intelligence they're going to fire the barrels. And so our SOPs are, we man the guns, we stand to, we observe the area, and we look for firing points, because normally not after a mortar attack or a rocket attack, it'd be followed by an assault on the compound. And on this one occasion, they'd fired a couple of bombs that had landed short, and my friend and I, Nick, we're in a Sangha position, manning the gun, and we're looking out to the bazaar for a firing position, and it's going dark, so can't really see the figures, but we can see the muzzle flashes of the weapon normally. And we're chatting away, and then all of a sudden we hear a thud, and the sandbag that's directly in front of my face, 2 feet in front of my face, it slopes from the first floor, it falls to the ground. And Nick and I look at each other, we put heads through the window, and there's an 82mm mortar bomb still intact, and it's smoking on the ground. And it actually hit the sandbag that was in front of my face, but for whatever reason, it just didn't detonate that day. Just, they were very accurate and they were very effective, but for whatever reason, it just didn't detonate that day. And as you do, we laughed about it, and we had a fag. We had a smoke, and we just sort of laughed it off. But had it gone off, it would have, it would have killed everybody.
Now, would you?
Yeah. A really good friend of mine. He had his finger shot off in an engagement, and we were firing out of a window next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, and a burst of, it was quite often for a burst of fire to come into the window, and you'd see the tracer rounds ricocheting around the room. And previous to that, an RPG had hit a Sangha position, and we thought it'd killed a good friend of mine called Stotty, but he was just buried in sandbags. It hit quite low, detonated, and he was all right. Perforated his eardrum, and then in that same engagement, burst of fire came in through the window, and it peppered the sandbags. A few of it came into the window, and one of the rounds took my friend's finger off, and the rounds had passed the front of my face, took his index finger off, which it's not a significant injury, but
fucking annoying, though.
It was close. Yeah, it was close enough. It was close enough. And it was like that every day. And one of the things I learned is when I come back, I couldn't remember a lot of the engagements. And when we came back, we were completely emaciated. We were skinny. I'd never smoked my entire life, but when I got there, I just started chain smoking, just one after the other, and we weren't really eating. And you see some of the pictures of us. I'm normally about 80 kilo, and I come back, I was probably 65 kilo, well under fighting weight. And the reason
for that length of time, it must have just. I suppose you kind of like alluded to earlier. You kind of get used to it, and it's a daily thing. It just becomes a progression, a grind. It's happening again. You get on with it, and you'll end up in that situation where you will become complacent.
Absolutely. Well, there was one operation in particular where we'd been there for about 5 weeks at this point, and we were just existing. We'd had enough. We were fighting with the enemy, but we were exhausted and just really needed a bit of a rest psychologically. Just too much had happened in a short space of time, and one of the companies had flown in, and it was a deliberate op to flush out the Taliban. And the company had flown fresh in from Camp Bastion, so they were fresh, clean shaven, fresh water, all that good stuff. We were absolutely hanging out, just skinny, dirty, big beards, and we were told we would provide a gun team to go into the centre of Sangin and flush them out. And one of my best mates, Stu, and I, we went and we sort of backfilled the company. And what's unique to Sangin, where the district centre is, there is a buffer zone between where the bazaar is and the buildings and where the compound where we stayed was. So the second you leave the compound gate, you're a sitting duck. It's just a flat plain of desert, like a desert wadi, if you like. And it was an early morning start. We left just before sunrise, and almost immediately after leaving the compound gates, we come into contact. And that continued for the rest of the day. For the next 7 to 8 hours, it was we were in contact in some way with the enemy, and we made our way into Sangin under contact, and we got into the maze of mud compound walls. And as you'll know, they're dried mud walls and they're high walls, and it's a maze of alleyways and buildings, and all the civ pop disperse because they know before anybody, before an ambush happens. So we're making our way through the Sangin town, and there's just a complete eerie silence, no one to be seen, but it's a maze of alleyways and buildings, and we're engaged with the enemy, and it gets progressively more intense, and we can see them. There's occasions where you'll see them run across an opening and then disappear into the compound. We can't really pin them down. And there's occasions where they'll run out into an alleyway and they'll fire an RPG down the alleyway where we're located and then disappear again. And there's rounds just like ricocheting everywhere. It's so intense and it's so loud. You just there's just times where you physically just can't take any more. It's like a sensory overload of noise and stimulus. And we continue fighting, and we keep pushing them north towards the Helmand River. So the fighting is getting more intense at this point because when they get to the river, there's nowhere for them to go. So they're literally fighting for their lives. And we push them into a compound, and we're told that we will assault the compound and kill any enemy fighters in there. And we make our way through the maze of the compound, all under fire. And then I remember we take a rest in this irrigation ditch, and we're all shattered at this point, absolutely saturated and exhausted, and there was a distinct moment where I remember looking into an irrigation ditch, and I look at one of the Afghan interpreters, and I think that he's dead because he's lying completely motionless, and so he's not moving. He's taking cover in this ditch, and then when I look closer, I can see he's crying, and so I give Stu a nudge, and I say, "Obviously, we've seen him over there," sort of thing, and he physically pissed himself with fear. You know, it was that intense. He was just absolutely petrified. And like I said, we could hear the Taliban in the compound. You could hear their voices, but because the fighting had been so intense, we'd split. The platoon was split, and we're all at different places in the compound. And there's talks of throwing a grenade over the wall, but we can't rule out where everybody is. And we're given the command to fix bayonets. And I always say this, that fortunately I never had to use my bayonet, but it's still something you remember because you obviously go through it in basic training, and then there was that moment where you're like, right, you've given the command. This is it. You know, this is as intense as it gets. You're about to bayonet the enemy, and we're still engaging various firing points, and we're taking cover. And then not long after that, we hear over the radio that someone's been shot, and it's a good friend of mine. He was only he weren't far. He was just down the alleyway on top of a flat mud roof, and he was the platoon sergeant. And he climbed up to the top of the flat roof with one of the junior lads, and we'd been ambushed from a cornfield. So we're trying to catch our breath, and we're trying to find the firing position. And he just puts his head up for a moment, and a single round he hits him, and he's shot through the neck. So Stu and I are told we're going to be the ones to go up there. We took a couple of Afghans with us, and we were going to suppress the enemy, and we were going to Kazivac Paddy off the roof. So we make our way through the maze of alleyways round the corner, climb up to the top of the flat mud roof, and he's lying there completely motionless. And there's rounds coming in, and but there's no blood initially, and we immediately just think, well, he's dead. He's dead. So it's just a body recovery at this point. So we're engaging the enemy, and I'm trying to assess him to see where the point of entry is, the bullet hole, the bullet entry point. I can see it's in the base of his neck, and then we're in a position where there's signs of life, but we need to get him off this flat mud roof because we're under attack, and we do the best we can delicately to get him down under fire and take him back to where the irrigation ditch was. I didn't really get time to assess him properly. We dropped him off, took all his body armour off him, and we were having a look. I left what medical kit I had. I was trying to tell him he was going to be all right, and then we had to go back up and engage the enemy to help with the evacuation. And at this point, there's a quad bike that comes in to evacuate him, to take him back to the compound. So it's one of the medics, and he's driving the quad bike on his own to get to our position under fire. And at one point, the quad bike is hit with an RPG, and it flips the bike, but the RPG doesn't detonate. It's a dud round. So gets back on the quad. It's just complete and utter carnage, and evacuates him. And we continue fighting. And one of the moments that I experienced that always stuck with me was my hands were covered in his blood, and they were all underneath my fingernails and saturated on my shirt. And I didn't have a change of clothes with me, so after the op and after we'd got back and after I'd gone back on stag, I still had the dried blood on my hands and on my clothes. and I couldn't get down to the river to try and wash it off until a couple of days later. And it was always, like a reminder of that. And even now, Frankie, if I'm stressed and I gnaw at my fingers and I draw a bit of blood, it almost takes me back straight away. And but Paddy survived. He's paralyzed from the neck down, but he survived. So there's so many occasions like that, and I just, when I come back, I couldn't remember them all. The only reason I had the information for the book was that I kept a contact chart, and it was a diary, and every day, whenever we were in an engagement, I would, to the best of my knowledge and accurately, record down what weapons were used, where did the attack come from, how many were killed, how many were injured, and that really helped me in terms of the book. But a psychologist later told me that sometimes during trauma we will try and forget these things, and it's kind of like a coping mechanism. Like
your mind just makes you think of something else.
Yeah, like a psychological amnesia almost.
Yeah.
And it was only when I started writing these experiences down that I was remembering things, and I was asking the lads I was with as well, and they would say, "Oh, do you remember the time when this happened and that happened?" And and that really helped me. But it wasn't until we got back that it all sort of they've all sort of come to the surface, and I just knew it wasn't right.
So how soon did that hit you once you got back to the UK then?
So after Sangin, I went straight out to Kajaki Dam, which was a
fucking hell.
It was a different. It wasn't as kinetic as Sangin.
Yeah.
But we were targeted with rockets and mortars because we were on top of a mountain, really looking down into Kajaki. And so I came back, and I felt like I was okay, and I had this really surreal experience where we flew out of Kabul and we flew to Cyprus for 24 hours decompression, which was an absolute joke because, as you know, we're just given a load of booze, you put on a beach away from any civ pop, and it's just complete anarchy. But at that time, my dad had retired from Saudi and he had an apartment in Cyprus. And it just so happened that where we were was only 40 minutes from where he was living. And after everything we'd been through, I said to one of the sergeant majors, I said, "Look, I know you wouldn't normally allow this, but my dad lives down there. Not seen him for years. And he'd recently just got over a prostate cancer. He'd had his prostate out. And it surprised me when he agreed to stand me down for the night and go and see him. And it was such a surreal experience because where he lived, we occasionally, after my visits to Saudi, we would go for a holiday to Cyprus all the way through my childhood. A week here and there. I'd usually spend 6 or 7 weeks in Saudi, and then my sister would fly out to Cyprus, and we'd have a holiday, the three of us, for a week or so. And so, fast forward all these years, I'm back there walking the same streets where I did as a kid, growing up, and just with these aspirations of being a para. It was almost like I was in a dream.
Yeah,
it didn't feel real. And all these years later, I'm back there, and I remember thinking, as a kid, I was just so desperate to join the military, and then I'm back there, just having survived what we went through on that rooftop, and I didn't tell my dad I was visiting. I just knocked on the door, and I had. It sounds a bit perverse, this, but I had some Gulf World War One desert shorts on. Well, they were trousers that had been made into shorts, and they're actually from a dead Taliban fighter, and they were in a clothes store. And I saw them, and I thought they look pretty. They look pretty like Ali. Then they look pretty cool. So took them and made them into shorts. I had them on, and an old ripped t-shirt, and I still had a beard, and I was smoking heavily. My hair, although I've got no hair now, I had long hair then. And he answered the door. He barely recognised me, and it was just such a surreal experience. I don't even remember the evening. I don't remember what we spoke about. And so we came back, and my ex-wife was pregnant at the time for that whole deployment. So I came back, and it was about 2 weeks until her due date. And so I didn't really get a chance to process everything that was going on because I was going to be a dad. And then a sequence of events happened, really, that all led to me eventually getting medically discharged out of the military. And I was diagnosed with skin cancer, and it was something or nothing. But I'd spent a lot of time in Saudi as a kid, and I'm really fair. And I was told it was a malignant melanoma, and they didn't know how far it spread to my body, but it was life threatening, and it had to be treated immediately. And then not long after that, I started pissing blood. So I'd convinced myself that the cancer had spread. I was only 21. And again, quite perversely in my mind, I thought this was how I was going to die. It all made sense. I was supposed to die out there, but I didn't. So, what was meant for me is to die of a disease. And I'd convinced myself that was what was happening. And I stopped sleeping, and I was drinking very heavily. And I was waiting for surgery the next week for my skin cancer, and the blood in my urine was being investigated. And I just didn't. It's hard to explain it, but I just felt I felt emotionally numb. Like I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel any emotions. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt like a robot. And I could be talking to somebody and just completely away with the fairies sort of thing. And again, the sleep deprivation is catching up with me, and the dependence on alcohol just to quiet the pinball in your mind, And and then eventually, for some reason, I don't know why, I started watching videos of people being executed, and I would order them off. I'd order them off the internet, and they would be delivered in a video. And my intention was to watch them, and I was hoping that I would feel something. I was hoping I would feel disgusted, or I'd feel sad, or it'd make me upset. But I would just watch these really disturbing videos, and it didn't have any impact on me. It was the same as going out to buy a pint of milk from the shop. It just had no feeling. It was like I was...
You were numb to it all, yeah.
I was emotionally dead inside. Yeah. Emotionally dead. And so it was only going to go one way. And when I think back, so basically one evening, it all came to a head with a failed suicide attempt. And what happened was, one evening, we had friends over, my wife and I, and we were drinking, and we were talking, and I'm not really engaging with anybody at this point. It's just noise to me. I'm completely numb, and I'm just drinking. And we've all had a few, and I start play fighting with my sister-in-law in the kitchen. And we're laughing, we're joking. So we'd all had a few. And then we start sparring, well, we're not sparring. I'm holding my hands up, and she's jabbing me and throwing punches, and I'm weaving and blocking them, and it's all in good faith. We're all having a good time, and then she just randomly catches me with a punch on the side of the head, and it's knuckles, bone to bone, and it stings. And then that was the stimulus. It was the sting. It was the first thing I'd felt in months, and it was pain. And that was what triggered it. It was that feeling of pain, and then it was almost like a switch, just a switch like that, and then all months of emotion just came out of me in the kitchen, and I just, with two clenched fists, started punching myself in my face as hard as I could, harder and harder, and I'm crying. I'm just crying uncontrollably, and I've not cried in years, and I'm hurting my face. I've cut my lip and I'm bleeding, and they're just watching me at this point. I'm just in absolute rage. And then at some point, my brother-in-law jumps up and he tries to stop me from hurting myself. So he runs across the kitchen and he throws his arms around me like a bear hug to stop me from hitting myself. And we fall against the kitchen top, off balance. And just as that happens, just randomly, I look up and I see the handle of a large kitchen knife, and without any thought whatsoever, I managed to pull it from the holder, and I just start slicing at my wrists in front of everybody. And he lets go of me, and I've just stood there in the kitchen on my own, and there's blood on the floor, and I'm bloodied and bruised, and there's blood everywhere, and I'm just an absolute mess. And they're absolutely petrified, and it's understandable. And that was really the catalyst to me getting help. And I just knew that I wasn't right. And so basically I ended up seeing a psychologist through the military. And he was brilliant. He really was. And I went through a course of medication to help me sleep and to just calm me. And he got me to write down all my experiences, all the way, some from childhood, mostly from Afghan. And it helped a lot. It helped me digest them and process them. And so, we decided that the best course of action was for my mental health was for me to leave the military at that point. So are we right for time, Frankie?
That?
I don't. Yeah. Do you know? I didn't want to do anything other than be a soldier. That was all I ever wanted to be. But at that point, I didn't even know whether I wanted to be alive, and so I knew it was the best thing for me to do, because there was already talk of the battalion going back to Afghanistan the following year, and they did in 2008. And it wasn't all to do with Afghanistan. I do think stuff from childhood came up, and I was always fascinated why did it affect me like it did, and not other people who had similar, if not worse, experiences. So I had two theories. One of them being that it affected more people than I ever realised, and I now know that to be true. I didn't at the time, and it can manifest itself quite later on in life. And there was a famous study done with Vietnam veterans, and they looked at Vietnam veterans, and there was a correlation with some of the soldiers that had PTSD and some form of childhood trauma. And there's a positive correlation there. So I definitely believe that's something to do with it. So I was given the diagnosis of complex PTSD, and I was still being investigated for pissing blood. The cancer at this point, I had 2 surgeries. They took a section out of my clavicle, sent it away. I had a second surgery, and fortunately I didn't have to have chemotherapy. But I was to be monitored for years after that, and I was at high risk, And it was the right thing to do to leave the military, I think, and it did help me significantly. But it doesn't. The symptoms subsided, but like with any mental health problem, it doesn't go away for me. I have bad days now, not to the extent that I did, like we all do, but I know what my triggers are and I know how to handle them. And it doesn't affect me in my day-to-day life mostly. Other than bonfire night is the worst time of the year for me, so I just tend to lock myself away.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, you're right about like I think it is. You're right. It does affect a lot more people than we care to admit. I mean, my own personal experiences have caused issues with myself, but that's more down to personal issues afterwards. But it was also when I ended up getting counselling and talking to the counsellor, I was talking about things that had happened years before, but military-wise, which I didn't think it had affected me. And you're right, doesn't it? A lot of people till long after, it takes the slightest thing to bring other things bubbling up. With me, it was putting everything in a box, in a box, in a box, in a box. And all of a sudden, the box exploded. It was, the box wasn't big enough any longer. And the way I have learned to deal with it is to shout at myself. Of all things, look in the mirror, look in the rearview mirror, and tell myself to stop being a cunt. And it kind of works for me. But one of the things that was weird for me was I started developing this, like, I wouldn't call it OCD, but I'd start imagining I'd left the back door open, or I'd left the gas on, and stuff like that. And it got to a point where it was that bad that I'd be driving to work, I'd be back to drive into work, and I'd go, I've left the gas on. And it was such an overwhelming feeling that I had to turn around and go back. And, it's like a 16-mile journey, and I'd be late for work. But I'd walk in the house knowing fine well that the door was locked or the gas was off. And the way I had that explained to me, I kind of like, me and the counsellor kind of come to the same conclusion. I said, basically, that's my mind. I'm about to think of something bad that's going to upset me. And this bit of my mind's going, no, you're not. You've left the gas on. It takes your mind away from whatever you're going to think about. Your mind can be a fucking horrible thing, or it can be a good tool. It kind of tries to heal itself. So like with you, it was blocking everything out. Like blocking your emotions completely, making you numb. But all of a sudden, like that box has got full again. It's you thumping yourself or whatever. It's brought everything out, type of thing. It's your mind's a wonderful thing, but it's a fucking dangerous thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And and as you said, it's so complex and it affects everybody differently, and what might work for one person doesn't work for another person. But it's been quite heartwarming, actually, that the amount of lads I've served with that have got in touch with me since I put the book out there, because same as you, I completely disconnected from the military when I left. Washed my hands of it. I just thought it's not good for me. It's not going to be good for me to keep going over those things. And I wasn't sure how it was going to be received, because it's not in our nature to be open and honest and what could be considered being vulnerable, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it was very heartwarming, the amount of guys that have got in touch with me, and they've said they've had similar experiences, and some of them are still battling, with their demons. And I certainly don't think there's enough. At that time, there was enough support out there, because you can't take a child at 16 and you can't have all those experiences and then overnight you're a civilian and you lose all of your support network. You completely lose your identity, because your identity is that the regiment, as being in that unit. And if that happens overnight and you don't have support, it's only going to go one way. It's only going to go one way. And I definitely had a drinking problem, and and I think back to how my mother was, and I just I can see how it can happen. And I still have a drink now, but at that time that was my only way to quiet those voices and those. So I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to sleep because of the horrendous nightmares, but I also didn't want to be awake because your mind's just on overdrive. And so wrongly, the only way I could find a happy medium was to be pissed most of the time, and it just gave me that bit of a numbness,
And the thing is, your body gets used to it, your mind gets used to it. You need more, and then it's like you say, it's not good. I mean, I wouldn't say I drink too much. Now look, you know what I mean? It's I'm all beer belly and no legs, mate. It is, use it as a comfort, and it's very, very, very easy to fall into that trap. And it's quite hard to get out of it. I wouldn't say I'm out of it, but we're better than we were, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
For you to, for you to openly admit all this as well, that's therapy for yourself. But as I've found with doing the pod, and again, I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet or anything like that, but other people who listen to them, read your book, they listen to your story, they listen to other guys' stories, read other people's books, and listen to podcasts, or whatever. They not only can they relate to it, but they know they're not alone. The other guys have gone through this, and it is okay to, the old saying, and it's a bit of a cliche, it's okay not to be okay. But what we've got to do is get everyone to talk, and people still aren't talking. I didn't for years. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I kind of almost ended up a recluse where I'd go to work, I'd go shopping, I wouldn't do nothing else. I'd just sit in a room in the house. The family was around me. They might as well have not been there. And I can't see whether that was caused by this or that. I mean, I know now why it was, but I didn't know I was like that. I just thought I was being normal. I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know why I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to find out why I didn't want to do that. So I suppose I kind of knew there was something wrong then, but I didn't want to know. So I kind of just bottled it up. So I was, once you'd left, the question I've got there is, how did the army treat you then, or was it just wash their hands of you?
So once it was decided that I was going to be discharged from the military, so I had 6 months of treatment with a psychologist, and it helped. It helped massively. And once I knew I was going to be leaving, my mindset shifted there towards recovery and what I was going to do with the rest of my life, because I was still only 23 at the time, so still very young. And so I started applying for jobs, and I was still being investigated for the blood in my urine. They diagnosed it with a rare kidney disease, and I had a couple of biopsies, and they said there was no known cause for the kidney disease, but it's incurable, and eventually my kidneys will fail, but it's just they don't know when. They said sometimes it can take 30 years, sometimes it can take a couple of months. And the treatment was just a case of managing the scarring tissue in the kidney and managing the symptoms, which was high blood pressure, mostly, but I felt okay. I didn't feel ill or poorly in any way. And so so I started looking at what I was going to do with my life, and naturally, I suppose, a natural progression for lads in the infantry, especially the paras. I thought, well, I'll be a bodyguard because it's good money, and it's all I knew. I didn't have any qualifications.
Fucking glutton for punishment. That's what you were.
Yeah, and I just because there was nothing really else that interested me, and so I went and did it was probably one of the most reputable close protection courses at that time, and it was run by a couple of lads from the SAS over in Hereford, and it was a 3-month course. Wow. And it was quite extensive and covered everything from vehicle maneuvers, bodyguarding, armored convoys, intelligence gathering, surveillance. It's touched on it. Really, really good. So I went and did that, and that was part of my resettlement. But at the same time, I had applied for the prison service. I applied for the Met Police, and I applied for the security service MI5 in London, and it was all done over written applications. It was at that time. You'd send off, get a written application, and I didn't. All the army did was they signposted me to the NHS and to charities outside the military after I'd left. But at this point, we're talking from getting back in 2006. I didn't get out until 2009. Well, it's probably the end of 2008. So a couple of years had passed here of me receiving treatment and doing courses. And I was in a place where I was okay. I was not drinking as much. I was focused on actually doing something with my life. I didn't want to let what had happened define me. And like I did when I joined the Paras at 16, I absolutely put everything into everything I did. Because when I left, I didn't even know how to pay a bill because I joined at 16. I didn't know how to pay a bill. I didn't know anything. I didn't have a CV, and I just applied the same strategy, whereas everything was almost obsessive. I know you were saying earlier about the looking at also OCD tendencies. Yeah, I suppose it's a similar thing. That was my focus, and I would the application forms. So the competency-based questions, I would research like the psychology behind them and the best answers and what they're looking for. Did everything that I could to give myself the best opportunity. And I'd already done my close protection course at this point. And what happened was I was offered a job at Wormwood Scrubs prison. That was the first thing that come online. And the only thing that I had to do was go for a final medical. And I was always open and honest about my kidney disease, but it wasn't affecting me day-to-day life. I was just having checkups regularly. And so I just had to have a final medical, and then I would get my posting. And so I was going to do that because I just thought, well, it won't be as exciting, but it's a career, and all that sort of stuff. Is a regular payment. And then just before I'd done that, I then got offered to go for an interview with the security services. So there are, like any organisation, there are a whole plethora of roles and jobs that you can do in the service. And so I went to an interview down into London. Didn't think anything of it, but again, applied the same principle. Just obsessively did my research, and surprisingly, I got invited back for another interview, and then a series of assessments for the role that I was applying for, and then the vetting was a huge part of that as well, understandably. and I decided to turn down the offer of the prison service, and then I ended up getting a job with security services in London, which I couldn't believe. I left school with no qualifications, still only very young, and
I know you're James Bond.
And I just I moved to London, so I was living in London, and because I always knew I was never going to go back to North Wales, and really I was only there for a couple of years, so I was really interested in behavioural science, and that came from I was always interested in the stuff that had happened to me as a child, and basically childhood psychology, and why people do what they do, and body language and all that good stuff. But the role that I wanted to move into, I didn't have qualifications, and it wasn't entirely out of my grasp, but it would have took me a long time. And at this point, this is 2011, the US had withdrawn from Iraq. Obviously, Saddam was no longer around, and we started seeing an increase in insurgency groups in Iraq, and so many lads I'd been in the military with were over there, not just in Iraq, Somalia, and back in Afghanistan, doing private military contracts and getting paid, rock star wages for doing the job that we did in the military. And probably in my immature mind, nobody knew the work I was doing other than my sister and my brother. And even then, it was only skimmed over for obvious reasons. And I said, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go and do private security. And they obviously thought I was crazy, throwing away another career. But I always thought I'd rather be a risk taker and fall flat on my face than always wish I'd have done it. And so I left, and the first job was actually not in the Middle East. It was in London, and it was a friend of mine I worked with had put me in touch with a family, and it was a high net worth family from Russia. And I worked directly with the family. So there was only 3 of us in the team, and we'd look after the family. We would go abroad with them. We would travel around Europe, but it didn't scratch that itch for me, because as you'll know, bodyguarding, it is glamorous as what you would imagine. There's a lot of sitting around and waiting. There's a lot of fetching, carrying, and and at the same time, I had mates that were back out in the sandpit, as it were, earning even more mega bucks tax free, and still still carrying a weapon, because everything I did was unarmed at that point. And so I applied for a company that was working in Iraq, and they, even though I had my close protection qual, they ran their own internal course selection course to go out on armoured convoys. And that was done in Hereford again. So that was about 6 weeks long. And it was all stuff we'd done before, but they obviously, at that time, the industry was becoming saturated with people leaving, and they wanted the best guys for the job, really. And so I went out to Iraq for the second time in 2011, and as on armoured convoys, initially as they call it a shooter and a medic. You're predominantly a medic, and we work with Iraqi local nationals, and we were looking after Americans, mostly from the oil and gas industry, and we would escort them where they needed to go. We would provide protection for them, and we would also look after and manage the local nationals, so from training, weapon handling, driver training, and it just involved me working in country for 3 months at a time, and then I'd have a month off. and it was more money than I'd ever experienced, and I liked it. It was very similar to being in the military. There was still a threat out there, but it wasn't, not even in the same ballpark as Afghanistan where I was. And I liked that we were armed and using different weapon systems. So we used Glock pistols and AK-47 rifles. We had armoured Toyota Land Cruisers. And it was great. And you'd save a lot of money. I was single at the time. And so for the first time in my whole life, where I never really had any money, having all this money and I could travel to different places and I still had I was divorced at this point. I divorced pretty much as soon as I left the military, but I've always had a really strong relationship with my son, and he understands that I was just in a position where, with no qualifications and I didn't really know where to turn, it was a natural progression for me to do that and to work away. And so my time off, I would split between seeing him and just enjoying some downtime, and it was brilliant, Frankie. So I did that for nearly 4 years.
That's a
pretty much
good old
4
time,
years.
isn't it?
Yeah, it was really good. I probably could have been more sensible with my money and the travelling, but as you do at a young age, you want to see the world. And
fuck it.
Yeah, just. And yeah, so fast forward to 2014, I met my wife, and up north in Manchester, and at that time I was still rotating through on the contracts, and it was a job I loved, but at that point, those 3 months away, it felt like a prison sentence, because there's nothing to do on the camp. There's a shop, and that is it. You share a room, and you're very much wishing the time away to have your month off, and then it goes very quickly. And after I met my wife, I decided that I didn't want to be away all the time from home, and I took the plunge, and I said I'm going to try and work the UK circuit again, as it were. And through an old work colleague, I managed to get into consultancy. So we would run courses for anything from government agencies, NGOs, journalists, and we'd call them a heat course, so hostile environment awareness training. And they were all bespoke courses for that client. And we would either run them in the UK or we would run them overseas. So we did a lot of work on the Syrian border and in North Africa predominantly. And it was brilliant. So we were like 2 or 3 week courses. So I'd go away for a few weeks, but then I'd be back, and that was more than manageable.
Yeah.
And it was a different skill set because you're teaching, and then from there, the client always had the option to use us on the ground as an advisor. So if they were going to an area of conflict, so let's say Juba in South Sudan, we could go as an advisor on the ground and just look after them essentially. And it was a good mix between the teaching side of it, the traveling, and then still getting the chance to get on the ground, get boots on the ground. And so I did that for a few years, and then in between those jobs, when I was in the UK, I started doing more and more surveillance work in the private circuit, and that was building up. And then through a few guys I was doing surveillance work for, a couple of undercover jobs were offered to me, and they were really good. So some of them obviously can't go into what they were. They weren't. How can I put it? I'm not putting myself at risk by saying that I was involved in them, but I couldn't really go into the details of what it involved. But
don't want you to.
So that was really
As
interesting.
you weren't watching me, I'm not bothered.
Yeah. So really interesting. And as the way the industry goes, one job, if you do a good job well, it normally leads to another job, and you have to take the shit jobs with the good jobs. I've done plenty of jobs where you're sitting in a car outside a celebrity's house for 12 hours, but then through networking and through trying to build a positive reputation for yourself, they lead to the better jobs. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was still scratching that itch of travelling and a bit of excitement, but I was living in the UK. And then it all came to a head in 2017 or 2016, end of 2016. So the last deployment I did, one of the last deployments I did was to Mosul in Kurdistan, northern Iraq. And 2 years earlier, ISIS had walked through Mosul pretty much unchallenged by the Iraqi security forces, took over Mosul and western Syria, and they declared it the new Islamic Caliphate. And they'd been there for 2 years, and there's some horrendous things that went on there for the people that lived there. Fast track to 2016, Iraq, backed by American advisors, they take Mosul back from ISIS, and I was asked to go on the ground with an American news team as an advisor, and we'd be on the ground with the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters and the Iraqi security forces. It was the Iraqi Golden Division, so that's their special forces, and they would clear a village of Mosul leading up to the centre, and we were one bound behind them, and we would go, and they would do a piece to camera, and we would interview the locals, the displaced people. It was a really, really good job. I mean, we were in some of the tunnels that ISIS were in. They were there 6 hours earlier, and then we're there. The bedding's still there. It was really exciting. Really exciting.
That's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy.
Yeah, and I nearly. There was an occasion there where I nearly lost my life, and it was we were at an outpost with the Peshmerga fighters, and we were talking to some of the fighters, asking about the families and where they were from originally, and the sporadic burst of fire in the distance, and a vehicle in the distance starts driving at the checkpoint, and almost immediately they're all screaming that the vehicle's driving towards us at speed. So we get into cover, and a whole volley of fire goes down to the vehicle, RPGs, automatic fire, and the vehicle detonates. There's a vehicle-borne ID, but I was told after it was only a partial detonation, but it was loud. It was loud enough, and a hot piece of shrapnel. So I took cover next to the camera tripod, and after the detonation, I found a hot piece of shrapnel embedded into the tripod of the camera next to where I was lying. I spent a month or so there. Can
you pick my lottery numbers on Saturday?
I know I can't. I can't have many chances left. So, no. But not long after that, I throughout my 10 years on the circuit, every few months when I was in the UK, I'd go to the hospital. They would run a full blood count. They would assess my urine. They would assess everything like an MOT, and it allowed me to do the job that I love to do. But in 2016, when I got back, not long after I got back from that deployment, that all came to a halt. And almost over the course of a couple of weeks, my kidneys failed, went into complete renal failure. And the day that I was rushed into hospital, I pissed and shit myself. And I later learned that it's something they do in the animal world where the animal purges itself of bodily fluids. And I was dying because my kidneys weren't doing the job they were supposed to. I was poisoning myself with toxins from the inside. And I was in a really, really bad way. So I was rushed into A&E, put into an induced coma, tubes coming out of me everywhere. And one of the main concerns was I had dangerously high levels of potassium in my blood, which can cause sudden cardiac arrest or stroke. So I had a tube put into the main artery in my neck, and I was put on dialysis. So everything had to stop at that point. I would go to the hospital for dialysis every other day, and I would plug myself into the machine for 4 hours at a time. And I was on the donors, the kidney donors register, just waiting for the transplant register. And I was on dialysis for about 5 to 7 months, something like that. And of all the people, my sister stepped up and she wanted to give me a kidney and save my life. And I know, it's just, all them years ago, she sacrificed so much. She had 2 kids of her own at this point, and she said, "No, I want to do it." And it just so happened we were a perfect match. And so for not the first time, she actually saved my life. And I was in hospital for about a week after the transplant, and immediately I felt brand new. As soon as I woke up, I felt different. I didn't realise how groggy I'd felt for years, really, just like having a hangover almost. But I made a promise to myself before I went into surgery for the transplant. I already had all these notes from the book, and I had a son that was he was getting much older, so he would have been, he's 18 now, he'd have been 11 or 12, something like that. And before I went in for surgery, I said to myself, if this is successful and I wake up from this, if it's the last thing I do, I'm going to publish this book with these ideas, whether it's good or not, because it's something I can give to him. And I talk about some of the soldiers I serve with in there that are no longer with us. So I think it's important that their voices are heard. And obviously the operation was a success, and I recovered very quickly with no issues since, and almost so randomly, or very, very strangely, my operation was on the 6th of June, 2017. So obviously D-Day, the day of the D-Day landings.
Yeah. So
that was 2017, and then at the end of 2018, I joined the fire service. So as soon as I'd recovered, I got myself fit again. My wife works for the fire service in a admin role, and I didn't know if I was going to go back to doing contracting or consulting. And it was actually her that said, "Why don't you just consider the fire brigade? Because there's so many veterans there. There's a lot of similarities to being in the army, and there's still that element of excitement, and it's the best thing I ever did. It
still scratches the itch.
It's a fantastic job. I'm at a fairly busy city centre station, and it still challenges me. There's a wide variety of jobs because it's fire and rescue. We deal with all kinds of weird and wonderful incidents, and we also support police and ambulance as well. So it challenges me, and I've got a really good really good team around me, a watch, and it just reminds me of being back in the paras all them years ago. It's not a platoon, but it's 10 people there that you're really close to. You do everything with each other. You eat together. We socialize outside of work. You experience things that not ordinary people will see on a regularly, and I love it. Absolutely love it, and I'd recommend it. I'd recommend it to anybody. It's a great career.
So I mean, it's like again an old cliche. It's one brotherhood to another brotherhood.
Yeah, we actually have. I helped start a veterans network within our brigade, within our service, and I thought it'd be useful for lads leaving the military and girls just to have some in common with somebody, and it was one of the first ones that started, and it's kind of gone from strength to strength. And we do all sorts of things, from meeting up and going down the pub to raising money for charity. We've recently got back from a battlefield tour in Belgium with the network. It's fantastic, and again, it's just that someone to have a chat with, have a brew with, someone with similar background if you're struggling, and that might not be military related. That could be relationships, bereavements, and it's always, veterans are always happy and more open to speak to other veterans, aren't they? So it's a fantastic thing to have.
Well, I mean, we've been on for 2 hours, 5 minutes now. I mean, I could sit here all night, to be honest. I really could.
Yeah.
But I don't think we can. And a couple of things I wanted to ask you. I mean, one of the things that hit me in the book is, and this is going to sound fucking soppy, but one of the things that hit me in the book, right, is the way you discussed about meeting your wife and how you feel about her and stuff like that. And I mean, like I say, I listen to podcasts while I'm driving, and listening to that bit, I was with the fucking fairies. I'm just like driving, big smile on my face, going, "This is mint. This is lovely." I mean, the way you talked about her was beautiful, you know. And I don't, like I say, I don't want to make it sound soppy, but I really enjoyed that bit of the book. It kind of, I don't know, it kind of put the icing on the cake type of thing. It was like, you've been all the way down, and you've gone up and down, and then you've come up and you've got there. You know, you were there. And I just liked it. It really did. It made it. I wouldn't say it was the best bit of the book. Yeah, it was for me. I was something else. But no, I really, you know, again, anyone who's listening, go out and buy his book, because it is really, really good. It's been a long, long time since I've took time out. Again, all right, I did it on Audible. I'm lazy. But it's a long time since I sit down and took time out to actually listen to something or read something and stuff like that. You know, I really enjoyed it. I recommend it wholeheartedly. One question I've got though, and obviously you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. Did your mother ever come back into your life at any point?
No, that's a good question actually. So I forgot to mention that. So really briefly, but as a kid, she came back to the town a couple of times, and she was in a few different relationships. And there's one distinct memory I have where I was 11 or 12, and a friend of mine had just left school, and I'd heard a rumour that she was living in a flat on an estate. And I went and knocked on after school. I'd not seen her for years at this point. It was this 3:30 in the afternoon, and she answered the door with 3:30 in the afternoon, absolutely stinking of vodka, blind drunk, with a black eye and her arm in a cast. And she just, just not a nice.
I mean, this might sound a bit off, but not trying to defend her. But you know, alcoholism is a disease. It affects everybody, you know, but there's no coming back from it. Not when it's that bad, unfortunately. I mean, it's going to have affected you with all the other things that have happened, like you said, complex PTSD. That's going to be part of this and stuff like that. I mean, let's not dwell on that, you know. Right. I don't really know what to say now, apart from, I mean, thanks for coming on, sharing your story. Again, anyone who's listening, please buy the book. There'll be links in the show notes to where it is on Amazon. and Audible. Lazy people. Links to your socials as well, so I'll get them out there as well. Again, thanks for coming on. I really, really appreciate it, and I've loved listening to your story. I've listened to your story twice. Right, thank you. Honestly, thanks for coming on. I hope you enjoyed that podcast. I enjoyed recording it. If you could just hit the like button, and also if you could subscribe and hit the notification bell, that'd be great, because it'll help the channel grow. The more people will see it, the bigger it'll get, and the more guests I can get on, and the more people I can talk to. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, like I said. Look forward to the next one. Hopefully we'll be out next week as normal. Bye-bye now.